Glenn Hubbard is standing by. Glenn is an economic advisor to Mitt Romney, obviously was involved in the debate preparation. And I'll have to ask you first, Glenn, how do you think he did?
Well, I think he did very well, both in the grasp of economic issues and the delineation of different roles of government and governing. So I think it was a big win for Governor Romney. I think people got to see him tonight as the knowledgeable person he is.
Yeah, now let me ask you about this tax plan that got a lot of attention in the early part of the debate. What Mitt Romney has said is that he wants to cut rates across the board, that he will keep that from being a tax cut for the rich by limiting tax deductions for upper income people, and he'll do those things without adding to the deficit and without adding to the tax burden on the middle class. The president said that can't be done. This debate would be more helpful if we actually had some details of that plan. Can you provide some details?
Well, first of all, what Governor Romney is talking about is the sort of fundamental tax reform that economists have talked about for decades and is quite similar in spirit to the Bowles-Simpson plan that the president walked away from. The idea is to lower marginal tax rates and then strip away some of the underbrush, as the governor put it, to remove or limit some tax preferences. Studies recently by Princeton professor Harvey Rosen, Harvard professor Martin Feldstein, and the American Enterprise Institute have shown that there are many, many ways of doing this. What the president said is simply false.
So can we see any details of how that would work, which deductions would have to be limited, et cetera? I suppose we're not going to see any of that before Election Day.
Well, what Governor Romney said is two things. One, everything is on the table, and that it has to be progressive so that the adjustments that are made on deductions, exemptions, credits need to be made mainly for upper income people. How do you do that? Bowles-Simpson provides one roadmap. Another alternative are caps on deductions. There are many, many ways to do this. The difference is Governor Romney would work with the Congress to do it. The president has proposed nothing.
Let me bring in Robert Reich here. He was the Labor Secretary in the Clinton administration, is an Obama supporter. And the two of you actually mirror very nicely that debate that we heard tonight and the very different views of the government's role. Secretary Reich, you have long argued for some government investment. You heard that echoed by President Obama tonight. Did you think the debate fairly represented the broader economic debate that this country needs to have?
Alan, I did. I thought it was a good debate. I was disappointed a little bit in the fact that Governor Romney supplied so few specifics. I was hoping that tonight we'd hear a little bit more, not only about which deductions and loopholes would be closed, but also about how the governor expected, with a huge tax cut, mostly for the wealthy, and also with increases in military spending, to reduce the budget deficit. What I did hear for the first time very clearly from the governor is that he was going to do it through economic growth. Now, economic growth is sort of a magic asterisk. That's what supply-siders have traditionally used. The Congressional Budget Office does not score economic growth per se, and maybe that's what it is. It's kind of wishful thinking that economic growth is going to generate more tax revenues, and those tax revenues are going to reduce the budget deficit. But it's very hard. It's very hard to analyze this kind of plan.
Let's go to Glenn Hubbard. Is that Mitt Romney's proposal, that this will all come through economic growth?
No,
or is he talking? Go ahead.
No, not at all. And first, on the idea of specificity of a plan, it is the president, who's been in office now for almost 4 years, who has not shared an economic plan for the next 4 years, and his budget was rejected by every member of his own party. So it is he who does not have a plan. Governor Romney correctly, as would virtually the entire economics profession, put a great deal of emphasis on economic growth. But there's no free lunch in tax reform. Cutting marginal rates will require broadening the base. Governor Romney has a consistent narrative about fiscal policy. All the president will tell us is let's raise taxes on upper income people, but let's increase spending a lot more, and I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to pay for it.
Robert Reich.
Well, there were no specifics there from Romney at all. The other thing that I was a little bit disappointed in terms of lack of specifics had to do with Dodd-Frank and also the repeal, not only the governor's desire to repeal Dodd-Frank, but also his desire to repeal the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. He says that he would provide something in to replace both Dodd-Frank, the financial reform bill, and also the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, but he was not clear at all on what he would do and how he would do it. There again, we have this sort of aspirational aspirational argument, but it's not a real argument because the public doesn't have anything to hold on to.
Yeah, let me ask you something that Glenn Hubbard asked earlier. Maybe you can explain it. Mitt Romney said repeatedly that his tax plan is not a $5 trillion tax cut. How does the president then repeatedly say it is?
Well, from what we have seen, and again, they're independent analysts. The Tax Policy Center is one source. Those independent analysts, not working for the Democrats, not working for the Republicans, continue to put out reports saying if we don't know exactly what's going to be closed, what tax loopholes are going to be closed, what is defined as a tax loophole, what's defined as a deduction, and which of those are going to be closed, we have to assume that they're not going to happen. And if they're not going to happen, then this is going to be a $5 trillion or almost a $5 trillion tax cut.
That sounds like a lot of assumptions, Glenn. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I come back in on this? First of all, again, on the tax plan, we have several studies, Governor Romney mentioned 6, by some of the most eminent academic economists in this country. You know, people can certainly go look for themselves. It is easy to do this. I want to pick up on something that Professor Reich mentioned on the Dodd-Frank, because here, Governor Romney is not saying just get rid of Dodd-Frank. He's saying we need to replace it. And he identified something particularly wrong with it, which is doubling down on too big to fail. Too big to fail in housing were at the core of the financial crisis. Dodd-Frank forgot to mention housing, except a potential screw-up on mortgages that the governor mentioned, and it doubled down on too big to fail. It is exactly the wrong medicine. If this were Jeopardy, you couldn't even match the question and the answer. Very specific suggestion, no response from the president.
To the contrary, let me disagree with Professor Hubbard because I heard nothing from Governor Romney about how he would avoid too big to fail. I mean, we have a major problem with big banks that are bigger than ever before. In Dodd-Frank, there is a winding down mechanism. There is a mechanism there to actually get the big banks that are failing to go into the effective bankruptcy. What is Romney recommending to replace that mechanism with? I simply don't know.
First of all, your description just isn't accurate. Dodd-Frank actually names systemically important financial institutions. It doubles down. I think most economists are very suspicious that the orderly liquidation authority mechanism in Dodd-Frank would be terribly effective. There are multiple ways to do this. There's a project on an alternative bankruptcy regime that colleagues at the Stanford Law School have worked on. There are a number of bail-in proposals, but they start from a principle that no institution, whether it's a commercial firm or a financial firm, should be above the ability to fail. That's a clear difference between Governor Romney and the president.
Let me ask you both to help with one other thing that has to have been confusing to people watching this debate. The president talked about a tax break for companies that move jobs overseas. Mitt Romney says there is no such tax break. Can you clarify that, Glenn Hubbard?
Well, I think what the president is referring to is the way we tax so-called multinational corporations, so U.S. corporations that also do business abroad. And what Governor Romney has said is that we need a tax system that allows those companies to bring back that money that they've earned overseas without paying additional U.S. tax.
Because they've already paid taxes overseas.
Because they already paid the foreign tax.
Yeah.
Well, I think what the president doesn't understand is that the value of a multinational depends on exploiting its intangibles, its trademarks, think Coke or Disney, overseas. This is really in the interest of our country. It creates a lot of headquarters and important jobs here. I think it's an anti-multinational company provision dressed up in the president's language.
Robert Reich.
Well, I don't see it that way at all. There are many features of the tax code that allow companies to deduct all sorts of expenses, not only with regard to foreign taxes, but also expenses involved in moving their operations abroad. I think all the president is doing is saying, let's get rid of all of the tax incentives that might provide artificial incentives for companies to go abroad.
You know what,
if companies can do it more efficiently abroad, that's fine, but we don't need and we don't want the artificial incentives. I mean, when Governor Romney is talking about a tax amnesty or something that will allow companies to bring their profits back home, he's not talking about a change. He has not proposed a fundamental change in the tax system, the international tax system. He's just proposing an amnesty. And the problem is, once you provide a tax amnesty, companies are going to wait for the next tax amnesty. That's been the pattern we've seen historically.
Professor, you too are not entitled to your own facts. What Governor Romney has proposed is a permanent territorial tax system. It is not an amnesty. The biggest incentive we have to push jobs away is the uncompetitive corporate tax in this country. Governor Romney has proposed to reduce the corporate tax. By the way, so is President Obama. Those are the key issues that we need to be talking about. There is no amnesty. But Governor Romney's talked about a permanent territorial system.
Let me just say, with regard to the corporate tax, again, it would be very useful for the public in making a decision here to understand what specific deductions and what specific tax credits Governor Romney is proposing to close for corporations. Simply, and the president has made clear the kinds of things that he wants to close, but we don't know from Governor Romney. The same thing with regard to personal income taxes. We don't know the specifics. I was surprised tonight that Governor Romney did not include tonight the proposal that apparently he floated today, and that was a limit of $17,000 on personal deductions. I thought that was interesting, interesting both that he proposed it and also that he didn't mention it today, because I think it's a very important addition to his tax plan.
Glenn Hubbard, can you clarify that where that $17,000 limit on deductions came from?
First of all, I've got to go back to the corporate tax because you've simply misstated this. First of all, President Obama sent his Treasury Secretary to the Hills to simply say, wouldn't it be nice if we could lower rates if you guys figure out how to broaden the base? The president threw out a few examples tonight that add up to very little. Governor Romney has talked about a lot of examples, and there are a lot of examples. To the question about the deduction limit, as I said before, one way you could broaden the base is to have caps on deductions. Marty Feldstein at Harvard has worked on such a proposal. That is only one way of many, many ways of doing it. Tax reform is something people have talked about a long time. What we need is a president who will lead it and not ignore his own commission, as this president has done.
Okay, but can you talk about
again,
this?
The president has hardly ignored the Erskine-Bowles, Howland-Simpson commission because the president is moving directly in the direction of that commission. What Professor Hubbard keeps saying, and it's very interesting, is that a lot of academics have worked on these issues, and I agree, a lot of academics have worked on a lot of these issues, but Mitt Romney is the person who is running for president, and Mitt Romney has not provided the details that the public needs in order to make a choice.
You've made that point. Let me ask you, before I let the two of you go, I really appreciate this. Again, I think this debate tonight has been really clarifying in terms of the choice that voters have to make in November. The two of you have helped clarify that even more. But let me ask you about one more issue, and that is education. A lot of talk tonight about education, but that's an area where it's a little less clear to me what either candidate is really proposing. And Glenn Hubbard, let you go first.
Well, I think with education, you have to look at education as we conventionally describe it and also training more broadly. Governor Romney said two very important things tonight. On education, we need to have federal dollars more specifically track a child to improve choice and competition. On training, he said we have so many training programs that aren't particularly effective, something economists have been saying for a very long time. Let's turn a lot of this money over to states and over to individuals in personal reemployment accounts. Both the education idea and the training idea are a very big idea and very different from what the president has proposed.
Robert Reich.
Well, the president is talking, and in fact, the president has even got some kudos tonight from Governor Romney about the race to the top, setting objectives for state and local education authorities, understanding that the federal government really doesn't have a major role to play in K through 12 education, except with regard to setting goals and providing incentives, and that's exactly what the race to the top has done. My concern, and I think the president's concern as expressed tonight, was what happens to the programs such as Title I. Those are expenditures for poor schools and poor school districts that have a predominant number of low-income students in them. What happens to those kinds of programs when we have a Romney budget that is going to necessitate major cuts in domestic discretionary programs, just of the sort that Title I represents?
Gentlemen, very clarifying discussion. Thank you both for being with us and helping add to this night. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Alan.